ladies and gentlemen, there is a kind of prayer, not the polite kind, not the rehearsed kind, but a kind that doesn't just echo in the room. It erupts into heaven and demands an answer. Have you ever felt so burdened, so desperate, so consumed by holy fire that words failed you, but your spirit roared? That's not ordinary prayer. That's earthquaking prayer. That's the kind of prayer that makes heaven stand at attention and earth shift in response. And that's why you need to hear this today. Because we are too close to breakthrough, too close to revival, too close to destiny, to keep praying safe prayers. If you've ever wondered what kind of prayer God cannot ignore, stay with me, because this message is not for the faint of heart. It's for the hungry. This kind of prayer doesn't begin with your lips. It begins with your surrender. You don't provoke heaven by your vocabulary. You provoke heaven by your availability. Heaven moves when someone on earth says, I will not let go until you bless me. When your spirit wrestles, not out of rebellion, but out of revelation, He responds. Why? Because heaven is not drawn to performance. Heaven is drawn to faith. The earth groans for the revealing of sons and daughters who know how to pray in secret. Prayer born in the secret place becomes power revealed in the public place. The kind of prayer that wakes the earth. Is it shallow? It's soaked in worship, soaked in waiting, soaked in tears. It's not rushed. It's not routine. It's not religion. It's relationship. Earth is shaken when heaven hears the voice of someone it knows. There is a desperation that is holy. It's the sound of a heart that says, I cannot go another day without you. And when desperation collides with faith, miracles ignite. Walls fall. Chains break. Dead things come to life. It is not volume that makes prayer powerful. It is the weight of the cry. And some cries carry eternity inside them. Let me warn you, this kind of prayer will cost you. It will strip you of pride. It will expose your motives. It will break your comfort. And it will make you dangerous. But let me also call you, if you're tired of weak prayers and powerless Christianity, if you're ready to shake your city, your family, your life, then it's time to pray prayers that provoke heaven and wake the earth. There is a stirring in the spirit. God is searching, not for the loud, but for the yielded, not for the gifted, but for the hungry. And if you dare to say, here I am, Lord, teach me to pray like that, then you will see what others only dream about. Because when heaven is provoked, earth cannot stay asleep. So pray until something happens. Pray until heaven breaks in. Pray until the earth wakes up. Because this kind of prayer changes everything. There is a kind of prayer that costs something. Something deep, something real, something raw. It isn't whispered before meals or spoken out of routine. It isn't packaged neatly or delivered politely. This kind of prayer comes from the inner chambers of the soul, where comfort has been stripped away, and where dependence on God is no longer optional. Heaven does not respond to casual. It never has. When we look across time through the spiritual history of those who walked with power and purpose, it's never been the lukewarm who shook heaven. It's never been the convenient prayers that carried revival. It's always been the ones who burned, the ones who cried out, not because they were told to, not because it was a scheduled time of devotion, but because something inside them could no longer stay silent. This kind of prayer is costly because it demands something sacred. Surrender. True surrender. Not the kind where we say your will be done while secretly hoping ours will win out, but the kind where everything is placed on the altar. Ambitions, dreams, timelines, expectations, and left there, fully yielded. It's the prayer that doesn't just ask God to show up, but dares to say, God, wreck me if you must. Just don't leave me the way I am. What provokes heaven is not eloquence, but desperation. It's not how articulate your words are, but how authentic your cry is. You can be silent outwardly and still roar in the spirit. Heaven listens to that kind of roar. It listens for the prayer that comes from a spirit pressed to the edge, one that has tasted the bitterness of defeat or the ache of longing, and still chooses to worship, still chooses to believe. You see, this kind of prayer cannot be faked. You can fake many things in life, but not the kind of prayer that provokes heaven. Because when heaven is provoked, heaven responds. That's why it costs so much. Because when God begins to respond, things begin to move, and movement always disrupts the status quo. The moment heaven gets involved, everything has to shift. Mindsets, relationships, environments, and yes, even you. Many people want God to move, but they don't want to pay the price. They want the fire without the altar. They want the breakthrough without the brokenness. But this kind of prayer, the kind that provokes heaven, is born from brokenness. It's forged in the fire of seasons where nothing made sense, but faith refused to die. It's not a prayer you learn. It's a prayer you live. You live it. Through seasons of unanswered questions where you have to press in anyway. You live it through betrayal, through suffering, through silence. You live it when you keep knocking on heaven's door, not because you see results, but because you know he's listening. That's what makes this prayer costly. You keep showing up. You keep crying out. You keep trusting, not because you have to, but because there's nowhere else to go. When everything around you crumbles and you still say, "Blessed be the name of the Lord," you've crossed into holy territory, and that's where heaven leans in. People often ask, what's the secret to powerful prayer? The answer is simple: death. Death to self, death to pride, death to the image you try to protect. Powerful prayer flows from those who no longer care how they look, only that God shows up. There's a humility in that kind of posture that heaven cannot resist. God is not moved by performance. He's moved by presence, the presence of a surrendered heart, the presence of a person who says, "God, I don't just want you, I need you." And when you pray like that, when your soul is laid bare before him, you become a living sacrifice, and that aroma rises to the throne of God like incense. Some of the greatest moves of God in history were ignited not by plans or programs, but by people who fell on their faces and would not get up until heaven broke in. People who locked the door, turned off the world, and cried out until the atmosphere changed. People who knew that there's a kind of prayer that doesn't just reach God, it provokes him to move. But let's be honest, that kind of prayer will make you uncomfortable. It will strip your schedule. It will demand your focus. It will stretch your faith. It will ask for your nights, your early mornings, your tears. And it will test your motives, because sometimes heaven will delay the answer, not because it isn't listening, but because it's refining. It's easy to start praying when you're inspired. It's another thing to keep praying when you're exhausted, when nothing looks like it's working, when the silence of heaven feels deafening. But those who press through that veil of silence are the ones who discover what it truly means to commune with the living God. This is why not everyone finds it, not because it's hidden from us, but because it's only revealed to those who are willing to go deeper, and going deeper always costs more. It costs your convenience. It costs your pride. It costs your need to control outcomes, but oh, the reward is beyond compare. The nearness of God, the weight of his presence, the sound of heaven's response. Because when heaven is provoked, It doesn't stay still. When God hears that cry, that deep, desperate, pure cry, he moves. Angels are dispatched. Chains fall. Miracles are set in motion. Divine alignment begins to happen. But most of all, your own heart is changed. You become the answer to your own prayer. So if you feel like you're at the end of yourself, good. That's where this kind of prayer begins. If you feel like you have nothing left to give him that. That's what he wants. Not your perfection, your surrender, not your performance, your presence. Because when you give him all of you, heaven will give you all of him. And when that exchange happens, when the deep of you calls out to the deep of him, the earth cannot stay silent. It must respond. That's what this kind of prayer does. It provokes heaven and wakes the earth. Prayer that shakes the earth is not the product of routine. It is not manufactured through discipline alone, nor is it sustained by emotion. Earth-shaking prayer is born in a place deeper than our daily devotions, deeper than our needs, and deeper than our pain. It is born in intimacy. Deep, undistracted, uninterrupted intimacy with the one who sees in secret and rewards in the open. The kind of prayer that stirs atmospheres and ignites movements is the overflow of communion with God, not the noise of obligation. So many people desire to see change in their world. They want revival in their families, healing in their cities, breakthrough in their communities. They cry out for God to move out there. But what they don't realize is that the earth doesn't wake until heaven is moved. And heaven isn't moved by distant voices. Heaven is moved by familiar ones. Voices that have been heard often in the secret place. Voices that have lain close to the heart of the Father. Not just to ask, but to know him. There is a difference between praying to be heard and praying because you hear him. Intimacy is the soil in which this kind of powerful prayer grows. It cannot be rushed, it cannot be faked, and it cannot be substituted. It's not about how long you pray or how loud you get. It's about how close you are. God is not impressed by volume, but he is drawn to proximity. When you come close to him, not just with your words, but with your entire being, something begins to shift in the spirit. It's not that you convince God to act. It's that you align yourself so deeply with his heart that heaven begins to move through you. This kind of prayer doesn't start with a list of needs. It begins with a hunger to abide. It's the kind of prayer that doesn't count minutes because when you're in the presence of someone you love, time loses its meaning. It's not transactional, it's relational. It's not about getting things from God, it's about getting God. And when you have him, everything else changes. The people who carry the most authority in prayer are the ones who carry the most intimacy in private. You see, when someone lives in the secret place, when they've made it their home, not just a pit stop, their words carry weight, not because of charisma or training, but because of presence. The earth responds to the prayers of those who walk with God, because creation itself recognizes the sound of heaven moving through humanity. The earth is not shaken by people who know how to preach or quote scripture. It is shaken by those who have stood face to face with the living God and have come away marked. And let me be clear, this kind of intimacy is cultivated, not inherited. No one can give it to you. No one can lay hands on you and transfer it. It must be sought, wrestled for, waited on. There are no shortcuts. The intimacy that fuels this kind of prayer is built when no one is watching. It's what you pursue when you don't need a platform, when no one's looking, when no one is clapping. It's what happens when you choose to sit in stillness, not just with your mouth, but with your heart. When your soul becomes quiet enough to hear the whisper of the Father, and when his whisper becomes enough, this level of communion with God purifies your prayer life. You no longer pray just for convenience or comfort. You pray for alignment. You stop begging God to fix everything and start asking him to transform you. You no longer demand that circumstances bend to your will, because your will has already bent to His. You begin to pray not out of fear, but out of faith. Not out of panic, but out of partnership. And that partnership is what makes all the difference. When someone prays from intimacy, they don't just speak to God. They speak with Him. Their prayer becomes an echo of His voice, a reflection of His desires. They start to pray heaven's will into earth's reality. That's why the earth begins to respond. The Bible says the whole earth groans in eager expectation for the revealing of the sons and daughters of God. Who are those sons and daughters? They're the ones who know their Father. They've spent time with Him. They've learned His tone, His mood, His nature. They don't pray for attention. They pray from revelation. That's what changes things. That's what wakes the earth. When someone wrapped in the fragrance of heaven walks into a room, the atmosphere cannot stay the same. Demons tremble. Chains begin to weaken. Discouragement begins to break. Hope starts to rise. Why? Not because that person is special, but because they carry something from the presence of the one who is. Intimacy gives weight to your words, authority to your voice, and clarity to your discernment. It births prayers that are not just emotional, but prophetic. And let's be honest, intimacy is not always easy. It requires the shutting down of distractions. It requires you to slow down when the world tells you to speed up. It requires sacrifice. You may lose sleep. You may lose popularity. You may even lose your grip on some things you once thought were important. But you will gain something far greater. You will gain access to the heart of God. And when you have that, you have everything. The kind of prayer that wakes the earth is a holy echo of the heart of God, released through human voices that have dared to go beyond surface-level religion and plunge into the deep waters of communion. It's the kind of prayer that doesn't die after one session. It lingers. It continues. It leaves residue in the room because it wasn't powered by need. It was powered by love. So if you long to see the earth shaken, if you want to see cities turned upside down, marriages restored, miracles released, and lives transformed, then don't just shout louder. Draw closer. Get into the secret place until the secret place gets into you. Let prayer become your lifestyle, not just your language. Let intimacy with God be your obsession, not your obligation. Because the ones who know Him best will always pray most like Him. And the ones who pray like Him, they shift nation. This is the kind of prayer that doesn't just pass the time. It alters the timeline. It disrupts the expected and makes room for the supernatural. It calls things that are not as though they were. It doesn't wait for earth to approve. It moves because heaven has already decreed, and that decree flows from the heart of God to the heart of one who dares to dwell. Prayer that shakes the earth is not born in public. It is born in the place where only you and God remain. And when it is birthed there, it cannot be ignored here. That is the power of intimacy. And that is the kind of prayer that provokes heaven and wakes the earth. There is a fragrance that heaven recognizes instantly. It's not found in perfect words or polished phrases. It's not produced by religious routines or eloquent repetitions. It's the fragrance of holy desperation, the aroma of a heart that refuses to let go of God, no matter the cost. This desperation, when combined with unwavering faith, becomes the fuel for the kind of prayer that stirs heaven and shakes earth. It is a combustion of surrender and belief. It is raw, it is real, and it is relentless. Prayer that provokes heaven and wakes the earth is never a matter of routine. It's not the prayer that fits nicely into our schedules or leaves us feeling good about ourselves. It is the kind of prayer that interrupts our comfort and ignites a fire within us. This prayer comes from a place of deep yearning, a place where the soul cries out because it cannot stay silent any longer. There's an ache behind this kind of prayer, a spiritual ache that says, God, if you don't move, I'm undone. Desperation is not weakness. It is strength in its purest form. It is the moment you realize that no one and nothing else will satisfy, that no solution, no relationship, no human effort will bring what only God can bring. When your spirit is crushed and you still choose to pray. When the answers haven't come and you still believe. When the storm doesn't pass but you keep standing in the rain with your hands lifted. That is holy desperation. That is the kind of cry that gets God's attention. There is something about faith wrapped in desperation that heaven simply cannot ignore. It is the prayer that presses past the crowd, like the woman with the issue of blood who said, "If I can just touch the hem of his garment." It is the blind man who kept shouting, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me," even when everyone around him told him to be quiet. These were not polite, well-mannered prayers. These were groans, cries, shouts. These were moments when desperation collided with faith, and heaven responded with power. This kind of prayer is unfiltered. It's not worried about sounding theologically correct or polished for the ears of others. It's honest, it's transparent, and it's often messy. It's the kind of prayer that says, "God, I don't understand, but I still trust you. I don't see it yet, but I still believe." Faith without desperation can become dry. Desperation without faith can become hopeless. But when the two come together, they form a cry so powerful, so full of purpose, that the very atmosphere begins to shift. When someone prays like that, they're not just asking God for help, they're declaring their total dependence on Him. They're laying down every backup plan, every plan B, and saying, "You alone are my source. You alone are my answer." That kind of faith is dangerous to darkness. It's the kind of faith that causes demons to tremble and mountains to move, because it's not based on emotion or appearance. It's based on trust in the unshakable character of God. The fire of faith is not proven in moments of ease. It is proven in moments of waiting, when you've prayed and nothing has changed, when you've fasted and still feel weak, when you've believed and still see no sign of breakthrough. And yet in those moments, if you choose to still lift your voice, if you choose to still knock on heaven's door, something eternal begins to take shape inside of you. God may not always change your situation immediately, but He always changes you in the process. And sometimes that is the greater miracle, because the person who enters into desperate prayer is never the same when they leave. They emerge stronger, purified, more in tune with heaven's heartbeat. They begin to see with spiritual eyes, to walk with deeper sensitivity, and to speak with greater authority. That is what happens when desperation is met with faith. You don't just receive from God, you are transformed by Him. This kind of prayer doesn't stop after 5 minutes. It lingers, it wrestles. It presses in when answers don't come. It persists when emotions fade. It continues when others give up. Desperate faith doesn't have a clock. It has a cause. And when you're contending for something bigger than yourself, revival in your home, healing in your body, restoration in your generation, you don't stop praying because the fire dies down. You keep praying until the fire falls. It's in this space of desperation and faith that we begin to step into authority. Not because of who we are, but because of who we know. Heaven trusts those who have walked through the fire and still chose to pray. Heaven releases power to those who have every reason to quit, but choose instead to fall on their knees. That is not weakness. That is warfare. That is victory. Sometimes we're waiting for God to move, and God is waiting for us to cry out. He's waiting for our prayer life to move from mild to fiery, from comfortable to costly, because only the fire can release what's been held up. Only the cry can open what's been closed. And it's not because God needs convincing, it's because we need transforming. In desperation, our walls fall down. Our pride falls off. Our defenses collapse. And suddenly we are naked before God, raw and real. That is the place where heaven begins to move. It is not just the words of our prayer that carry weight. It is the weight of our heart behind the words. You can whisper a prayer with trembling lips and still shake the heavens if your heart is fully engaged. You can cry out through tears and broken sentences, and God will still hear the full volume of your faith, because he doesn't listen the way we listen. He listens through the lens of love, through the sound of sincerity. When you pray with holy desperation and fire-filled faith, you will begin to see what others only dream about. Breakthroughs that were impossible will suddenly become inevitable. Closed doors will open. Hard hearts will soften. Dry bones will live again. Not because you prayed perfectly, but because you prayed persistently. Because you dared to keep believing when everything around you said to stop. If you want to see heaven respond, pray with a heart that is fully yielded, fully dependent, and fully on fire. Let your cry come not from your lips alone, but from the depths of your being. Let it be soaked in hunger and set ablaze with faith. That is the kind of prayer that doesn't stay in the room. It rises, it resounds, and it reverberates. It shakes the very foundations of the earth, and heaven cannot help but answer. This is the kind of prayer that carries the fragrance of desperation and the fire of faith. This is the kind of prayer that provokes heaven and wakes the earth. There is a level of prayer that no longer asks for convenience or comfort. It is the kind of prayer that calls down fire. The kind that places your heart on the altar and says, "Burn away everything that is not of you." This kind of prayer is not polite. It is not soft. It is not passive. It is bold. It is fierce. It is costly. Because to pray like this means you are no longer seeking safety. It means you are inviting transformation. And transformation rarely comes without disruption. When someone truly understands what it means to provoke heaven and wake the earth, they stop praying safe prayers. They stop asking God to make life easy and start asking him to make them dangerous to the kingdom of darkness. These are the prayers that don't just seek to escape battles, they declare war. They come from people who've been so gripped by the presence of God, so consumed by the fire of his Spirit, that they would rather be refined than comfortable. They would rather be changed than applauded. They would rather burn with truth than glow with approval. Prayer that provokes heaven is born in surrender, but it is expressed through boldness. It's not hesitant. It doesn't tiptoe around truth. It doesn't ask for small things. It stretches itself beyond limitations and lays hold of promises that only heaven can deliver. When Elijah called down fire on Mount Carmel, it wasn't because he was trying to make a scene. It was because he was fully aligned with the will of God. That fire didn't fall on empty performance. It fell on the altar of bold obedience. That's what separates ordinary prayer from atmosphere-shifting intercession. It's not just about the volume or the emotion. It's about the depth of the surrender and the height of the faith. Elijah didn't wonder if God might respond. He knew. He knew because he had been with God in private before he ever stood before the people in public. His boldness wasn't arrogance. It was intimacy turned outward. He was confident, not in himself, but in the God who answers by fire. This kind of prayer has weight. When you carry fire in your words, it's because fire has passed through your soul. You've been purified in the hidden place. You've been emptied of your own agenda. You've been wrecked by his presence. And now, when you speak, you're not speaking ideas. You're releasing divine reality. Bold prayer is not about your tone. It's about the authority behind your tone. It's about speaking what heaven is already saying. But that kind of authority doesn't come cheaply. It comes through fire. It comes through the crushing. It comes through the quiet yes that no one sees. You cannot walk in the boldness of Elijah if you're not willing to hide yourself like Elijah. Before the fire fell in public, Elijah had already learned to depend on God in private. The public fire is always preceded by private faithfulness. And when that kind of boldness emerges in prayer, it doesn't just affect the person praying. It shifts entire regions. The spiritual climate begins to change. What was once dormant begins to stir. What was once silent begins to speak. The earth begins to respond, not to human authority, but to divine authority, released through a human vessel. When you pray with boldness, fueled by surrender, you become a conduit of supernatural disruption. We are not called to pray in a way that blends in with the noise of the world. We are called to pray in a way that interrupts it. The kind of prayer that makes demons nervous is not the kind that plays it safe. It's the kind that takes risks, that steps out in faith, that declares, if God said it, I will believe it, even if I haven't seen it yet. Bold prayer sees with heaven's eyes. It doesn't pray what it sees in the natural. It prays what it hears in the spirit. When you begin to pray like that, you won't always be understood. Boldness will often look like foolishness to those who live by sight instead of faith. But if you're going to see the fire fall, you have to stop living for the approval of men and start living from the approval of God. You have to be willing to stand alone, to look strange, to speak what others are afraid to say, because fire doesn't fall on passivity. It falls on risk. It falls on faith. It falls on the altar. And make no mistake, this kind of prayer is not for show. It is not for applause. It is not for social media clips or religious theater. It is for real, raw, world-shifting intercession. The kind that terrifies hell and opens heaven. The kind that doesn't just sound spiritual, it is spiritual. It doesn't beg for revival, it becomes revival. It doesn't wait for something to happen. When you pray with this kind of boldness, you begin to realize that your voice is not just a sound. It's a weapon forged in the fire of intimacy and unleashed through the force of faith. You stop asking, God, can you use me? And you start declaring, here I am, send me. You stop measuring your prayers by how they make you feel, and you start measuring them by what they release. There are moments in history when heaven looks for someone bold enough to step out of the boat, to step into the fire, to step up to the altar and declare what no one else is willing to say. Someone willing to stand in the gap and pray until something shifts. Someone willing to ask for rain when there's no cloud in sight. Someone willing to call down fire, not for spectacle. And when God finds that kind of person, when he finds someone whose heart is fully his, whose spirit is unshaken, whose faith is unwavering, he releases power, real power, not just emotional moments, but eternal movements, not just goosebumps, but glory. Because he knows that when that fire falls, it won't be mishandled. It will be stewarded. It will be honored. It will be used to awaken the earth. This is the kind of prayer that doesn't end with amen. It ends with activation. It stirs you to move. It sends you into the world different than how you entered. It doesn't just provoke heaven once. It keeps heaven engaged. It doesn't just wake the earth for a moment. It keeps the earth trembling with expectation. This is the kind of prayer that dares to believe God still answers by fire. This is the kind of prayer that provokes heaven and wakes the earth. When prayer becomes a lifestyle and not just a moment, something begins to change, not just around us, but within us. Prayer becomes more than words whispered into the air. It becomes breath. It becomes heartbeat. It becomes movement. It shifts from a religious duty into a divine rhythm. It becomes the very atmosphere we carry. And when we live in that atmosphere, when we dwell continually in communion with the Spirit, we stop simply reacting to the world and start shaping it. This kind of prayer doesn't clock in and clock out. It isn't confined to morning devotions or crisis moments. It flows through every step, every breath, every word. It becomes constant. Not always loud, not always formal, but always present. And in that constancy, our spirit remains awake, alert, aligned. The veil between the seen and the unseen grows thinner. Heaven feels near. Earth becomes a canvas for divine action. And the ordinary becomes a stage for the miraculous. When you live a life saturated in prayer, you start to hear the whispers that others miss. You begin to perceive the heart of God in places where others only see chaos. You move differently, speak differently, respond differently. Because you're not operating from natural understanding. You're moving in rhythm with eternity. The world may not understand it, but heaven does, because when prayer becomes your lifestyle, your entire being becomes a portal for his presence. It's not about impressing God with long sentences. It's about walking with him in surrendered silence, in spontaneous worship, in deep, unshakable trust. You can be in the middle of your job, in a room full of people, and still be praying. You can carry a secret fire that burns quietly but refuses to go out. It becomes instinct, not a forced action, but a natural flow. And in that flow, the Spirit moves with power, because you've made space daily, hourly, for him to dwell. A praying life becomes a prophetic life. You don't just respond to the times, you discern them. You begin to see with clarity, speak with wisdom, and act with authority. You're no longer tossed by storms, you speak to them. You're no longer drained by battles, you're fueled by the fire within. The external world can shift, but your internal altar remains ablaze. And that flame becomes contagious. It draws people not to you, but to the God within you. When prayer becomes your daily language, your thoughts are filtered through faith. Your emotions are led by grace. Your reactions are governed by peace. You're not moved by headlines. You're anchored in truth. You're not shaken by bad news. You already know the good news. You carry answers. You carry clarity. You carry hope. Because you carry him. That kind of life cannot be manufactured. It can't be faked. It can't be imitated. It must be forged in the secret place, grown in the soil of consistency, built through seasons of stillness and storms. It's not just about intensity. It's about intimacy. It's about showing up every day, whether you feel goosebumps or feel nothing, whether you hear thunder or hear silence. You come anyway. You show up anyway, because he's worthy, because he's near. Because prayer is no longer an obligation, it's oxygen. When prayer is your oxygen, you don't wait for the world to give you peace. You live from the peace that's already within you. You don't beg for joy. You release the joy that flows from your spirit. You don't walk into a room wondering what atmosphere is present. You bring the atmosphere with you. The fire doesn't stay in your prayer closet. It follows you into your meetings, your relationships, your daily routine. And people may not know how to name it, but they'll feel it, they'll sense it, because heaven will rest on you. And it's not because you're perfect. It's not because you've mastered some secret formula. It's because you've said yes over and over. In weakness and in strength, in clarity and in confusion, you've said, God, I want you more than I want comfort. I want you more than I want answers. I want you more than I want control. And that surrender, repeated daily, is what builds a prayer life that doesn't just visit heaven, but brings heaven down to earth. Living a life of prayer doesn't mean you're always speaking. It means you're always listening, always yielding, always in communion. It means you're constantly aware that you are not alone, that the Spirit of God lives in you, speaks through you, moves through you. It means that every room becomes a sanctuary. Every car ride becomes a worship session. Every step becomes a prophetic act. And every moment becomes an invitation to go deeper. You begin to understand that revival isn't just an event. It's a lifestyle. Awakening isn't just a service. It's a posture. And miracles aren't reserved for Sunday. They're meant for Monday through Saturday too. Because when your heart is aligned with heaven and your life is saturated in prayer, you don't chase power. Power follows you, not for your glory, but for his, not for performance, but for purpose. And it's all rooted in one simple, ongoing decision: to dwell with him daily, hourly, moment by moment. And the more you pray, the more you change. You're softened, humbled, refined. You begin to look more like him. speak more like him, love more like him. And that's the goal. Not just answered prayers, but a transformed life. Not just fire from heaven, but a heart that becomes a resting place for his glory. This kind of life is not reserved for a few spiritual elites. It's for the hungry, the willing, the yielded. It's for the ones who say, God, if you're looking for a place to dwell, let it be me. It's for the ones who aren't satisfied with shallow Christianity, with empty religion, with powerless routine. It's for the ones who know that there must be more, and who won't stop praying until they find it. Because when prayer becomes your way of life, heaven doesn't just visit you, it lives with you. And earth doesn't just observe you, it is awakened through you. This is the kind of prayer that changes lives. This is the kind of life that hosts revival. This is the kind of communion that provokes heaven and wakes the earth. Prayer that provokes heaven and wakes the earth is not only about passion, it is about alignment. It is about praying what is on God's heart, not just what is on our mind. Too often we approach prayer like a shopping list, presenting our desires without pausing to ask what the Spirit is saying. But the prayer that shifts atmospheres, the kind that makes demons tremble and angels move, is prayer born not from flesh, but from the Spirit. It's prayer that echoes the will of heaven, not the wants of earth. When our hearts come into alignment with God's heart, something extraordinary happens. We no longer pray from earth to heaven. We pray from heaven into the earth. That is the power of spiritual alignment. It's more than obedience, it's agreement. It's stepping into the divine rhythm of what God is doing and saying. It's tuning your soul to the frequency of the Spirit, so that when you pray, you're not begging, you're declaring, you're not guessing. You're partnering. Your words carry weight because they originate not in anxiety or ambition, but in divine clarity. You become a mouthpiece for what God has already purposed. And when heaven hears a sound that matches its own intention, it responds. The heavens open. The power is released. The impossible becomes possible. The natural bows to the supernatural. But that kind of alignment requires a surrendered life. It requires that we lay down not just our sin, but even our opinions, our preferences, our pride, and our personal timelines. It means we stop trying to manipulate God into doing what we want, and instead we yield to what He wants to do through us. The most powerful prayers are not the ones we shout the loudest. They are the ones we pray with hearts fully yielded to the Spirit. The ones that say, God, not my will but yours, not my way, but yours. Not my timing, but yours. Those are the prayers that shake foundations and change generations. When Jesus taught his disciples to pray, he didn't begin with petitions. He began with alignment. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Before asking for daily bread, before asking for forgiveness, before mentioning any personal need, Jesus modeled a posture of reverent agreement. That's not a coincidence. That's a blueprint. Heaven responds to agreement. Not shallow words, but deep unity. When our spirits are aligned with the heartbeat of God. We must stop measuring the success of prayer by whether we get what we asked for, and start measuring it by whether we touched heaven and brought it to earth. Sometimes the answer to our prayer is not what we expected, but it is exactly what heaven intended. And when we are aligned with God's heart, even a no can be received with peace, because it's not about control, it's about communion. It's not about results, it's about relationship. And from that place, we gain insight that goes beyond human understanding. We begin to see through heaven's lens, not our own limited sight. This kind of alignment makes you dangerous to the enemy, because once you begin to pray heaven's agenda, you become a threat to every stronghold, every principality, and every lie the enemy has built in the earth. You become a divine disruptor, not because you're trying to be radical, but because you've come into agreement with the one who holds all authority. When a believer is fully alive, their words carry the same spirit that hovered over the waters in Genesis, the same spirit that raised Jesus from the dead. You're not just making noise, you're enforcing victory. Spiritual alignment also brings clarity. So many believers pray out of confusion, out of fear, out of desperation. But when you align with the Spirit, fear is replaced by faith, and confusion is replaced by confidence. You're not groping in the dark. You're praying from revelation. You're declaring from discernment. You begin to pray things you didn't plan to pray. You find yourself interceding for people you didn't think about, declaring promises you didn't write down, speaking with authority you didn't practice. Because it's not you, it's Him, through you. And that's when heaven moves. When you are aligned, your timing becomes synchronized with heaven's timing. We've all prayed prayers that seemed unanswered, only to realize later that what we thought was delay was divine preparation. But when you are aligned, you stop striving to make things happen and begin to trust that the Spirit is always moving, even when it's not visible. Alignment breeds trust, and trust releases peace. That peace becomes a foundation on which bold, unwavering, atmosphere-shifting prayer can be built. This is why the enemy fights your alignment more than your activity. He's not afraid of busy Christians. He's afraid of aligned ones. He's not intimidated by noise. He's terrified of authority. And authority comes not from position, but from alignment. It's not about volume, it's about being in tune with the throne room. When a believer is aligned with God's will, their quiet whisper can carry more power than 1,000 shouting voices, because heaven is not impressed by our efforts. It's moved by our agreement. Alignment also protects us from burnout. Many grow weary in prayer, not because prayer is hard, but because they are praying without alignment. They are striving without surrender, pushing without partnering. But when you align, prayer becomes less about striving and more about flowing. You become a vessel, not an engine, a branch, not the vine. You stop carrying what you were never meant to carry and begin releasing what you were born to release. That's why Jesus said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." When we align, we don't lose power. We gain peace. The kind of prayer that provokes heaven and wakes the earth is not a one-time moment. It is a continual agreement with the King of Kings. It is living in a posture of yes, Lord, every day. It's being willing to lay your plans on the altar and pick up the burden of intercession. It's asking not just for blessings, but for blueprints. It's saying, "God, show me what you're doing and let me do it with you." This is the kind of prayer that becomes unstoppable, not because of human strength, but because of divine synergy. Heaven and earth move together. The Spirit speaks and you echo. God dreams and you declare. The earth groans and you respond. And through it all, you are not just praying to heaven, you are praying with heaven. That is alignment. That is agreement. That is power. And that, my friend, is a kind of prayer that provokes heaven and wakes the earth. There is a kind of prayer that doesn't just ask for change. It becomes the change. It doesn't wait for revival. It carries revival. This kind of prayer is not polished or predictable. It is raw. It is real. It is prophetic. It is born not out of comfort, but out of holy desperation. This is the kind of prayer that cries out, "Lord, do something in me so you can do something through me." And in that surrender, heaven draws near. The earth begins to respond. You see, when prayer becomes prophetic, it steps beyond the present moment. It touches the future. It reaches into the unseen and pulls it into the now. It speaks what God is saying, even when it contradicts what eyes can see or what ears have heard. It is prayer that declares rain and drought, light and darkness, resurrection in what appears to be dead. This is the kind of prayer that doesn't just report what is happening. It proclaims what will happen, not out of arrogance, but out of revelation. Prophetic prayer sees the bigger picture. It partners with God's agenda. It's not afraid to speak bold things because it knows who authored the promise. When you pray prophetically, you're not making things up. You're announcing what heaven has already ordained. It may sound strange to man, but it resonates with the Spirit, because the words don't originate in your logic. They erupt from your spirit, guided by the one who sees the end from the beginning. This is the kind of prayer that births movements. It goes beyond personal breakthrough and begins to shape communities, cities, even nations. It's the prayer that stirs intercessors at midnight, that causes groans too deep for words, that makes people weep for places they've never been and cry out for people they've never met. Because it's not about emotion, it's about burden. And burden is what heaven shares with those it trusts. The prophetic spirit in prayer doesn't play it safe. It breaks patterns. It challenges structures. It disturbs complacency. It is not here to comfort religion. It's here to provoke a response from heaven and shake the earth until dry bones live again, until old altars are restored, until walls of division fall, until the glory of the Lord fills the earth like the waters cover the sea. Prophetic prayer doesn't just recite, it declares. It doesn't just plead, it proclaims, because it carries the conviction that God is not distant. He is here. He is moving. And if we are to move with Him, our mouths must match His mission. Our prayers must echo His promises. And our faith must stretch beyond what's seen into what is spoken. Sometimes prophetic prayer sounds foolish. Noah building a boat when there was no rain, Elijah calling for fire on a drenched altar, Ezekiel prophesying to dry bones, Mary saying yes to a virgin birth. These weren't ordinary prayers. They were prophetic alignments with what heaven was doing even when earth didn't understand. And history was changed because someone dared to believe and speak what God had already willed. And that is the invitation. To move beyond safe prayers and into prophetic ones. To stop praying small because we're afraid to be disappointed. To stop editing our intercession to fit what seems possible. The moment we reduce our prayer life to what makes sense is the moment we limit the power of God. He doesn't need our logic, He needs our faith. He doesn't require perfection, He responds to alignment. When you pray prophetically, you create room for the Spirit to speak through you. Sometimes that means groaning when there are no words. Sometimes it means declaring when everyone else is silent. Sometimes it means praying through things you don't yet understand because the Spirit Himself is interceding through you. That is the mystery and the beauty of prophetic intercession. You're not praying to impress. You're not praying for performance. You're praying from presence. And when that presence fills the room, everything changes. You sense the weight of glory. You feel the trembling of heaven's nearness. And you just know that God is about to do something no man can take credit for. That is what prophetic prayer does. It tears the veil, it opens the heavens, and it sets the stage for divine visitation. This kind of prayer cannot be contained to a schedule. It may interrupt your plans. It may wake you at strange hours. It may call you into seasons of fasting, weeping warfare. It may set you apart. But it is never without purpose. Because when God finds someone who will pray what He is saying, who will declare what He is doing, He will pour out His Spirit without measure. Not just for that person, for others, for nations, for generations to come. You may not have a microphone, you may not have a stage, but if you have prophetic fire in your prayer life, you are shaping things in the Spirit that others will walk into in the natural. You are digging wells that others will drink from. You are preparing the way of the Lord. That's why prophetic intercessors often feel things before others see them. That's why they often weep over things that haven't happened yet, because they're not living by sight, they're living by revelation. And that kind of life is dangerous to the enemy. Prophetic prayer has one goal: to host the will of God on earth, to prepare the way, to remove the obstacles, to say what heaven is saying without fear, without hesitation, without apology, even when it costs something. especially when it costs something. Because when the weight of his voice burns in your bones, you cannot speak silent. You must speak. You must pray. You must birth what he is ready to release. And in doing so, you become more than a person of prayer. You become a prophetic vessel, a carrier of his heart, a conduit of his glory, a watchman on the wall, a voice crying in the wilderness, preparing the way, making straight the paths, until revival breaks out, until captives are free, until glory covers the earth. This is not emotionalism. This is not hype. This is the sound of prophetic prayer rising from the earth like incense, reaching the throne room, provoking heaven, and causing the earth to wake up from its slumber. This is the kind of prayer that releases divine disruption. This is the kind of prayer that provokes heaven and wakes the earth.